you would see some form of trauma in their life, something that shaped them along the way. It's either their environment, their behavior, or genetics. How well do you know the story about Ted Bundy? You probably heard of him. You probably know that he's a serial killer, but do you really know his story? I want to talk about this very, very interesting case. We all know that Ted Bundy was a serial killer back in the 70s. We don't know exactly how many he's actually killed. We think it's 30 to 100 different people, and yet he was convicted of killing 3. That's what we know. That's what's on the records. That's the evidence. But he's confessed to killing a lot more than that. We know that he was a serial killer. We understand that. We see books, or we watch movies and documentaries. We know about his crimes, but we don't really know much about him as a person. And as a licensed therapist, I'm a licensed professional counselor. I really enjoy looking at the psychology of criminals, especially. But I also talk about TV and film as well. I do this therapist reacts, and I talk about the mental health indicators of the subject that I'm talking about. And today's subject is Ted Bundy. It's a serious topic, and it's a frightening topic, because if you know a little bit about Ted Bundy, you know that he was charismatic. And when he smiled at you, it was too late. He had already identified his victims. He went after them, and yet he was a nice guy about it. That's what's so creepy about Ted Bundy. But before I get to that, I want to go back to when he was a kid. And you won't believe what he went through. And it really kind of shows why he became a psychopath. Now, I'm not excusing what he did. He's a serial killer. He was supposed to be in jail. He did horrible things. But it's really interesting when you look at it through the lens of mental health, how psychopathology can really develop at that pivotal years when he was a kid. And my word, Ted Bundy's story starts way before his crimes did. Really wild. But hey, before we get to that, I want you to subscribe to this channel. I want you to like it and share it, do all those kind of good things. That helps me grow. And I want to talk about today the story that you may not have heard of about Ted Bundy. So, for instance, did you know that his real name was Theodore Robert Cowell? Yes. He was born in the 1940s in Vermont. Pretty place, especially in the fall. And yet his childhood was anything but straightforward. It was very complicated. It involved a lot of deception and lies from the very beginning, even without him knowing. I mean, get this. All right, get this. His mother, who was Eleanor Louise Cowell, that's his mom, she was young. She was unmarried when she was pregnant. She was living in the conservatives' 1940s when being pregnant out of wedlock was taboo. Don't do that. That's terrible. You're a bad person. She felt shame and ostracized that she got pregnant out of wedlock. And to protect her reputation, Ted's mother's reputation, she moved to a home for unwed mothers. And that's where Ted was born. She went to this home, and there was other women who were pregnant and probably shamed and ostracized during the 40s. And that's where Ted Bundy was born. This is where things get really interesting here. So Ted, I'm gonna think through this and really think to say it slow here, because it's kind of interesting to grasp. Ted was raised believing that his mother was his sister, and his grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, were his parents. What? Yeah. So for the longest time, Ted grew up thinking that his mother was his sister. What? And then it didn't stop there. His grandparents, in order to make up the lie and make it more believable, he was told that his grandparents were actually his parents. Okay, so there is a lot of deception there. There's a lot going on. Can you imagine? Let's just pause there for a second. Can you imagine for a moment? One day, we don't know exactly when Ted found this truth out, but it was much later in life. He found out, oh, by the way, your sister's not really your sister. Your sister is your mom. And also your grandparents are not really your grandparents. They're your actual parents. What? Can you imagine what that would do to your psyche? To think about and the process that you have been lied to and deceived for all of your entire life by the very people who were supposed to protect you and to love you and accept you. That was Ted. That was Theodore. And I'm not bringing this up at all to give him sympathy. Not at all. We don't want to give excuses for his behavior. It's just interesting to see Ted's psychopathology here develop at a very early age. He learned about deception personally. And what that does to your human psyche and to your brain and to your emotional identity. Who is his mom? Who is his grandparents? Who is his family? Who is he? Wow, that's amazing. To wrap your head around that, that is crazy. And so his entire childhood was built on a lie. As a counselor, as a therapist, I can tell you that discovering your entire identity is a facade, that throws you off kilter. That starts a framework into the world. That makes you want to defend yourself against everybody else. That sets you apart. That gives you a distrust and a disdain for other people. You have to protect yourself at all costs. You cannot trust anyone. That's how he developed his identity. And for young Ted, the secret likely planted seeds of confusion and disconnection. That's key. That's a key moment here. So at a very early on, Ted's psychopathology really was fragmented and he lost all sense of identity and purpose. Ted's grandfather was a dominant figure in his life, but not really in a nurturing way. So not only is he lied to and deceived and all this other stuff that created confusion, his grandpa was verbally abusive to him. Reports suggest that his grandpa was volatile, abusive, with a temper, and he could erupt at any time. And so he was very, very aggressive. Ted had to walk around on eggshells around him. He had no idea what would set his grandfather off. And then on the opposite extreme of that, his grandmother was passive, letting his grandfather do whatever, and she would never bring anything up to confront him. This is Ted's childhood here. It's a dark and unsettling environment for him. It's automatically trauma. Of course, he's not thinking of it as trauma. He's thinking of it as, how dare you? I can't even trust you. I'm supposed to be loved and nurtured by you, but you are not only you are deceiving me, you have rejected me. And so this cognitive distortion that Ted developed early on, that is a key point here. Deception becomes a part of his facade that led to him killing his victims. That led his victims, they caught off guard because Ted had a facade, a deception that he learned from the best. Sad, isn't it? It's sad. And Ted was so impressionable and he sought stability, but he internalized his identity as not worthy. He realized that he was alone, and he learned that he had to survive by keeping people at a distance, looking at other people as his enemy. This development, as his brain develops, our brains develop until mid to late 20s. And as he was developing developmentally, his body, his brain, emotionally, he developed a mindset, a perception of what the world was like. And he was no longer going to be kept in a position of being a victim. He was going to prove himself externally as if a way to validate his existence in life. And that's key here as well. Even when he was around 4, Ted and his mother moved to Washington. So this is the beginning of setting up the stage, if we will. He was 4 years old. Mom moves to Washington. Then they married. Johnny becomes his stepdad. And guess what? Johnny's last name was Bundy. All right. Now we're starting to put the pieces together here. And so Ted, Theodore at the time, becomes Ted, and his mom marries Johnny Bundy. And so now in Washington, Theodore becomes Ted Bundy. And that's where Johnny, his stepdad, adopted him and wanted to love him. But do you think Ted really wanted that anymore? Not a chance. He was not going to let anyone else in his life. Even at that young age, he learned to not trust other people. And this is a lot like when babies, when they're very young and they're crying and nobody goes to their help when they're crying, eventually babies give up hope and they stop crying. And I think that's a little bit of what's going on here with Ted. He gave up hope that anyone else would be trustworthy, not even his new stepdad, even though his stepdad was pretty nurturing, it sounds like. So Ted never really connected or bonded with his dad, but he did get his last name, that famous last name. As Ted grew up, he learned to look at Johnny, his stepdad, as somebody that was beneath him. And there's another key moment. If we look back at the timeline of Ted's life, there are different key moments that we can point back to say, okay, yeah, this is, we can see this breakdown in his timeline that created this person of deception and a person without remorse, a person without empathy, a person that was driven to tear others down for his own pleasure. We see that. And so as Ted felt out of place in this new place geographically in Washington, he also felt out of place in his home. And he learned over time how to get one up on people. He was smart, he was intelligent, he was charismatic. People liked that. And he understood the human psychology really well. He studied it, literally studied it. He went to go and study psychology and law. Interesting, right? So there's another indicator, another part of this puzzle that we're seeing the making of a serial killer in Ted Bundy. So amazing. Not really amazing in a good way, but amazing in an interesting way. And the lie about his family structure, it lingered, it stayed with him, and it was unclear exactly when he found out, but we think it was sometime around adolescence. And adolescence, as we all know, is not always a fun time. And so his identity was formed during childhood to adolescence. Psychologically, this kind of identity rupture can lead to feelings of shame, anger, or even a need to control others to reclaim a sense of power. That's another indicator here. He felt like he did not have power in his life. And so he developed a whole different personalities to gain that power over others. As Ted entered his teenage years, he began to craft the persona that would later make him so dangerous. Charming, polished, and seemingly normal. If you were around when Ted Bundy was alive in the 70s, when he was older, and you were a woman, and the target was women who were long, dark hair. And when Ted Bundy walked up, and he would walk up to you and smile and introduce himself, and either he was an authority figure or he impersonated a police officer, he found a way to wedge his life into someone else's life, and then he took it like a prize. So Ted was a good student. He was described as handsome and charismatic with a knack for fitting in. He learned from a very early age how to do that, not because he wanted to make friends, because he wanted to be dominant over others. And being charismatic was a way of doing that. So by the time that he smiled at you and greeted and became your friend, it was too late. It's too late. That's scary. Ted did not look like your normal serial killer. He wasn't sleazy looking. He was the opposite. He would be like your best friend, or someone that would give you the shirt off his back, not because he was sympathetic, not because he was empathetic or cared. He looked at it as a way of dominating people. So if you were around when he was alive as an adult and he smiled at you, it was already too late. He'd already targeted you. He joined the Boy Scouts. He attended church and even worked part-time jobs. Does that sound like a serial killer? No. He fitted right in. And that's what's so scary about Ted. That's what's so scary about a lot of different serial killers. They fit in. They learn to fit in. That's the psychology here. And that's what we want to understand, what made him to be what he did. Why did he do what he do? And that's the scary thing here. We don't want to give him excuses. We don't want to sympathize with him. We want to understand it. We also want to make sure that we're not caught off guard. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't trust other people, but you want to be on guard. You don't just let anyone walk into your life. And you already probably know that. But back in the 70s, hey, you hitchhiked and did all kinds of crazy stuff that we would never do today. His peers, people that knew him, noted that he could be awkward and overly intense, and he struggled with deep insecurities. Well, yeah, the insecurities, that was the real Ted. The insecurities came from his childhood of not really having identity of who he was. And he was so obsessed with status. He loved nice clothes. He had a very polished all-American image. And he wanted to have the appearance of success. Another key here is the appearance, the perception. He wanted others to look at him, to look up at him, to look at him and know that he's successful. He's a great guy. I want to get to know him. That's what he wanted. And it's a fixation of external validation. That's a red flag in psychology. When you look to others for your own significance, or you want to tear others down to elevate yourself. There's a lot of narcissism there. There's psychopathology going on there. There's a need for dominance, to control, no empathy, only for themselves. That was his game. And a lot of this was a game for him. He knew what he was doing. Even when he was a teenager, he had some darker tendencies. There were reports that he did voyeurism, looked at others, peeping into windows and stealing to fuel his fantasies. And even as a teenager, he dabbled in breaking a law. He dabbled in invasion of privacy. And now I don't have any documented evidence. This is based on what other people have said, but if they're true, it suggests a very early pattern of boundary overstepping and a need for control, hallmarks of what we now consider psychopathic traits, a psychopath. A deep disregard for others' rights, no empathy, no remorse, a need for dominance and control at all cost, a lot of gaslighting, a lot of sympathy seeking. That was one of the biggest things that he did, was to gain others' sympathy. And his unstable childhood, which coupled with his intelligence, okay, let's link him up here. His horrible childhood, the denigration of his whole identity and purpose, and then his intelligence, his ability to manipulate. He's charismatic, he's good looking, and it sets the stage for something very sinister. As we all know, the rest is history, as they say about Ted Bundy. But Ted was wearing a mask on the inside, not really on the outside. He didn't need to hide his identity. In fact, that was against what he wanted. He wanted his victims to know him. He wanted their sympathy. He wanted their trust, so he can then swoop in and take that from them. That was power that he was seeking. So by the time that Ted reached adulthood, he was a master at deception. He enrolled in the University of Washington. Yes, he studied psychology. A little ironic, but yet I think it was on purpose. He went to study psychology, not necessarily to figure out his own problems, but he wanted to learn about other people. Another important link here, a piece of this puzzle. And then he pursued law. So psychology and law he had knowledge of. He even worked in political campaigns. This is a part of his ploy, his cover, if you will. He worked in political campaigns. He volunteered at a crisis hotline. He dated women who described him as attentive and charismatic. He even had dating relationships that were successful. Well, what I mean by successful, he didn't end up killing them. But that wasn't his intended target. That was all part of his game. So in the 1970s, underneath this polished exterior, Ted Bundy was becoming who we all know him to be. Between 1974 and 1978, those 4 years, he committed a series of horrific crimes that would cement his name in history. We all know that. We all know about Ted Bundy's crimes. They're horrific. He did confess to killing 30 across several states: Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and Florida. Though some experts believe that number of victims was over 100. Wow. His victims were often young women with long dark hair, targeted for their vulnerability. Ted looked for a weakness in others, and then he knew to either have authority. He pretended to be a fireman or a policeman, or a weakness in himself so other people will have sympathy on him. He even had a fake cast to fake a broken leg to gain sympathy. He often posed as an authority figure, a police officer or a firefighter, or even used a fake injury like a cast to lure women into helping him. So, what drove Ted to commit these crimes? From a psychological perspective, serial killers like Bundy often seek control and power, especially if they felt powerless in their past. If you were to look at the childhoods of, well, just about any number of serial killers who were psychopaths, you would see some form of trauma in their life, something that shaped them along the way. It's either their environment, their behavior, or genetics. Ted's charm would be a tool as a way to manipulate and dominate. He didn't just want to harm his victims, he wanted to possess them to exert ultimate control. The need for dominance, coupled with a lack of empathy, a core trait in psychopathology, allowed him to act without remorse. In interviews, Ted often deflected blame, even claiming his actions were driven by external forces like the media or society, looking for other people, other organizations to blame for his own actions. Another key indicator here of his psychopathology. It couldn't be him. It's all other people. They deserve it, or they influenced me. The refusal to take responsibility is a classic example for someone with psychological profile. It fits the psychopathology. Ted's crimes escalated until he was caught in 1975 in Utah after a traffic stop led police to find suspicious items in his car. What? What were those items? Why were they suspicious? Handcuffs, a crowbar, a ski mask. That's not suspicious. Whoa. Can you imagine getting pulled over and the police finding those items? And they thought, this was suspicious. That's how he got caught. Then he was later linked to several disappearances, but escaped custody 2 times. Come on, police, what's up? Showcasing his cunning and determination. Man, wow. Wow. How did he escape? Twice. His final spree, if you will, was in Florida in 1978. It was particularly brazen, targeting college students at Florida State University and even a 12-year-old girl. Yikes. These acts led to his ultimate capture, and in court, Ted represented himself. I'm better than anyone. I don't need a lawyer. I'm my best lawyer. That's a thinking of a psychopath. His charisma was on full display. Everybody saw it. That's what he wanted, playing in his own game again. But so was his arrogance. He was convicted of 3 murders in Florida and sentenced to death 3 times. And then on January 24th, 1989, Ted Bundy was indeed executed in the electric chair, ending his reign of terror. Wow. His childhood was marked by deception and instability, likely shaped his inability to form healthy emotional connections. That was the start of his path. His intelligence and charm became tools for manipulation rather than for good. But Ted wasn't a monster from birth. He was a product of choices, environment, and perhaps a predisposition toward psychopathy. His story reminds us that evil can't hide behind a smile. It doesn't matter if you're charismatic or not. What matters is what's going on the inside. And so you have to be careful with who you trust in your life. Wow. What a story of Ted Bundy. Theodore, did you know some of this? Was this new to you? What do you think about his childhood and how that must have been confusing from the very get-go, and how he developed a mistrust for people, and how that fueled his need for power over others? Wow. And then into his teen years, he committed deviant crimes, and then going into college, studying psychology and law, and then committing those heinous acts. My guess is he thought that he would never get caught. That's my thinking. Because when you are a psychopath, you think you're better than everyone else, and everybody else is beneath you. Exactly what he was thinking about his stepdad, Johnny. He felt that his stepdad was beneath him. And Ted developed this mantra that it's him against the world. And he's going to do whatever he wants to build himself up. Wow. So that's the psychology that's so interesting to me as a therapist, to look at what made Ted Bundy into a psychopath. There's not necessarily one thing that we can point to, but there are a lot of different times in his timeline that creates this. That makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. All these different parts of the timeline. And it's scary because he didn't fit the profile of a scary monster. Now, I know he had a mask in his car, a ski mask, and maybe he did use that after he committed the crime. But when he first met these women, he wasn't wearing a mask. He was wearing a smile, and he made the women let down the guard, and that was a mistake. And so by the time you saw him smile at you and introduce yourself to him, it was already too late. Thanks for watching this episode of the Ted Bundy and my reaction as a therapist. I want to encourage you to watch some of my other ones. Subscribe to this channel. I'm really curious to know your thoughts about this as well. Do you have someone else, another crime that you want me to analyze? I'll be happy to. Just let me know. All right, guys, take care of yourself. Bye-bye.